Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to DARPA Forward. This is our fourth DARPA Forward. I have to say it is really exciting for me to be in Georgia. I have a strange personal connection, but this is the place where the Army taught me to jump out of airplanes. So there's nothing like being absolutely convinced you're going to die as a way of making sure that you remember the place in which you learned. And to come full circle, actually, it's very special to me that my stepdaughter, who is also currently in the Army, is stationed at Fort Gordon. So this is a place that feels a little bit like family and has a deep personal connection to me and my kin. And of course, this is a place that as a DARPA program manager I visited many times. We have, as you just heard, lots of projects focused in Georgia Tech. And we're particularly grateful to Georgia Tech for hosting us and giving us access to this really amazing venue. So my role today is to introduce you to DARPA and to our mission, and also to the concept of DARPA Forward and why we're doing it. Before I tell you about DARPA, I thought it might be interesting to all of you to hear a little bit about yourselves as an audience. So first of all, we have about 740 of you in total, maybe 40%-ish in person. Not counting the DARPA people, approximately 10% are from government, 40% from academia, and 50% from industry, both large and small. Of the small businesses, 75 of you actually represent small businesses, and 20 of you are DARPA risers. Can I see a show of hands for the risers in the room? So I can't see that well because of the lights, but hopefully you can. I hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity to come talk to the risers throughout the next day and a half. They're early career researchers, and their research is related to national security and has demonstrated the potential to lead to technological surprise, which is something very special to us at DARPA. They were nominated by DARPA program managers and by university stakeholders here at Georgia Tech and across the region. Okay, one more distinction about all of you, and that is that just over half of you have never worked with DARPA before. That's particularly exciting for me. So I have two audiences. Those of you that know and love us, or maybe you don't have to love us, but those of you that know us well, we're here to let you know that we are still delivering on our mission. We want you to know what we're up to, what we're thinking about for the future, and give you a chance to tell us what we might be missing. For those of you that are new, we are here to introduce you to this crazy, unconventional concept that is DARPA. Like the video said, it's really not a thing, it's not a place, it's a collection of people all focused on moving technology forward. So let's start off by thinking a little bit about the landscape. It's a complex world. And it's not always easy, the way it might have been a few decades ago, to know who the adversaries are. We have criminal networks, we have terrorist networks, and we still have sort of peer adversary level nation states. But now the boundaries are often blurrier between those different kinds of organizations. They operate at multiple scales. They operate in both the physical and the virtual world. Technology is incredibly dynamic, democratized, and moving faster than ever. And that is awesome. Completely awesome if you're trying to solve new problems with new tools. It's a little bit terrifying when you're thinking about what others might be doing in order to come up with ways that can harm our military service members as they do their missions. So the world and the nation collectively, very complex, interdependent, a little volatile. I think people are still exhausted and grieving from the pandemic, and they're angry and afraid of change. So it's a very tense and dynamic state. National security just doesn't look like what we might have thought about, again, a couple decades ago, aircrafts, ships, or weapons. Now it means everything, from biodefense to cyber, maybe material science, atmospheric or climate modeling, you name it. And whatever it is you name, there's a pretty good chance that it's changing rapidly. Keeping our nation safe is hard. And so we're here today to talk about what we might be able to do about it. I'm sure it won't surprise any of you to know that we at DARPA think that science and technology are an important part of the solution space. Science and technology used wisely, purposefully harnessed, are key to our national security as well as to societal and economic advances. Those advances take an ecosystem, and I think you all know that. You're already part of that ecosystem. But let me give you sort of how I'm going to define the ecosystem and DARPA's role in that. So let's start off with the funders. So not just us, that includes the entirety of the Department of Defense, and you'll hear a little bit more about that with our first keynote speaker, the National Science Foundation, other government agencies or departments such as the Department of Energy, state and local governments, corporate research and development, philanthropists. It's a pretty diverse and interesting crowd funding new research and development. And then, in contrast to the funders, we have the doers, the universities, the nonprofits, the industry, all of you who are represented here, small businesses, federal labs, everybody collectively making steady progress forward. Okay, so within that ecosystem, we are the disruptors. DARPA was created during the Cold War in response to a huge technological surprise, the launch of the Sputnik satellite. The United States did not like that, did not want to be surprised like that ever again, and decided that the best way to prevent technological surprise was to create it. And with that, DARPA was born. For 64 years, we have been delivering on our mission. We have made and continue to make pivotal investments in breakthrough technologies for national security. We want to change the fundamental trajectories of technology development. We want to accelerate technology, or we want to find an entirely new way to solve a problem. When it seems like there are two impossible choices, we look for a third way. So to go to an example that's near and dear to my heart, are there any material scientists in the room? I can't see, but I'm going to guess that there's at least one hand up. No? Okay. So the material scientists will sympathize because they're asked to do this all the time. They're asked to make materials that have properties that nature had never, ever intended to occur. So something super strong, for example, without being heavy at all. Maybe impossible, maybe not. But that's an example of the third way. And by the way, for that lone material scientist in the room, you might not know this, but DARPA was actually seminal in the origination of the discipline of material science and engineering. A few other things that we're known for would include the Saturn V rocket, which took humans to the moon for the very first time. This little experiment called the ARPANET, which grew up and graduated and turned into the internet. We held a grand challenge, our very first, where self-driving cars raced each other across the desert, because after all, how hard could that be? Yeah, it was pretty hard. But what was probably even harder was for DARPA to stand in front of national and international media after not a single vehicle crossed the finish line and tell them we were going to do it again a year later. And a year later, multiple vehicles crossed the finish line. And a couple years after that, those same cars were put to the test in urban settings. And pretty much after that, the self-driving car industry was born. One more example, I could go on all day, and I have been constrained by my team not to do so. But one more that I just think is super relevant to the fact that you're all physically in the room today. That goes back to a program manager about a decade ago. He was actually an Air Force medical doctor who said, our warfighters are going all over the world, and they are facing diseases for which their immune systems have no protection. And we need to find a better way to make vaccines. That was the first time I heard the term mRNA vaccine, and it was the first time I ever heard of this little company called Moderna. So it's something we're particularly proud of. But, you know, DARPA is not in the business of talking about the past. We're in the business of talking about the future. So as the self-driving car story probably indicated, we're not afraid of risk. In fact, we embrace it, and we often celebrate it. So in order to be able to continue to celebrate risk, I don't think it's actually very natural for humans to do that all the time. We have a really unusual business model. We recruit program managers from across all sectors and disciplines. We give them access to something close to $4 billion, and we tell them to go and create and execute technology programs that will change the world. And then, just when they start getting comfortable, which is around 4 or 5 years, we kick them out. So at any moment in time, you have, say, 90 to 100 DARPA program managers racing around the country and racing against the clock. Collectively, they start about 50 new programs a year. 50, 50. For those of you that haven't worked with us before, those programs first make it to you as calls for proposals, which we call broad agency announcements, or BAAs. I want to put in a little plug here. If you think that you, probably as part of a team, could meet one of our BAA goals, you should absolutely submit a proposal. And if it is a good BAA, if it's a good DARPA BAA, the first time you read it through, you should be absolutely convinced that it's impossible. If you don't like the program ideas that you're seeing, if you think there's something that we're missing, then tell us about it. And in the meantime, I'll just dabble a little bit and give you some of the things that people are working on inside DARPA today. There are way too many to name them all, so I'm just going to do a couple of thematic clusters. So first, I think we have to talk about artificial intelligence. So DARPA tends to think of AI as a series of waves. First wave was rule-based, think TurboTax. Second was, or actually is, statistically based. This is the one that we're fully immersed in, the era of deep learning and big data. big data. The third wave actually brings those two together, and that's where a lot of DARPA AI-focused programs are really pushing. They're looking at the combination of those two first waves, but really what we have to start thinking about is what happens in the fourth wave. And there'll be a few things you'll hear about towards the end of tomorrow that touch on that. Another really hot topic in technology has to do with microelectronics. So continuous improvement in microelectronics over the previous decades has enabled countless aspects of modern life. So you can see the Moore's Law curve, and you can see that not too many years ago, people were really convinced that that curve was coming to an end. So DARPA placed a big bet and created a program called the Electronics Resurgence Initiative to see whether or not we could move past that. That was a few years ago. We are now all in on some of the breakthroughs that were demonstrated during ERI, and we're now looking at launching ERI 2.0. We've actually already launched it, which looks at the technological challenges that we have to face to make those breakthroughs actually work at scale, manufacturable, and in the real world. Okay, so ERI and microelectronics, we're always thinking about user problems, but those are very much technological pushes. But actually, the vast majority of things we do at DARPA are very much tied to some kind of a problem we're trying to solve. So my third example is going to focus on something that a lot of our program managers across multiple technological disciplines are thinking about, and that's the topic of resilient supply chains. So we have multiple programs looking at how you would make things like food, water, or medicine right where you need it. So imagine extracting your food and your water from thin air. Imagine making medicines out of commodity materials that you could buy absolutely anywhere in the world in large quantities. We're also thinking about modeling the very complex supply networks, supply and demand networks, and sort of those multiple tiers of complexity and the fragility so that we have a better sense of how to stress test and how to develop new resiliencies against them. And of course, we're not so naive as to think that you can make everything at the point of need. So we have programs focusing on new ways of doing transportation, changing the whole set of assumptions about what's possible in terms of logistics. So as I said, these are just a very small sample of all the things that you were doing. You don't have to memorize them. The only thing that I think is worth remembering is that it's our business model. New people, new ideas, big risks. The business model is important for you to understand because it brings us to why we're here. DARPA has periodically brought together people for really big events, usually say every 3 years, one massive conference, thousands of people, say either in DC or California. And these have been fantastic. You know, personally, I've gotten to attend about 3 of them, exactly 3 of them, actually. And great connections have been made, new ideas have been sparked, and successes and failures both have been celebrated. Here's what worried me from the very first one that I attended. Not who was I meeting, but who was I missing. So when I left DARPA a few years ago, which I thought forever, I moved to Colorado, and I got a chance to meet just a small sampling of the people we were missing all up and down the Mountain West. People who were working on problems related to energy and natural resources, implying incredible creativity, the same kind of breakthrough, crazy kind of idea space that I knew DARPA program managers did, but they were not thinking at all about national security. So with DARPA Forward, we decided to try to do things differently. We said it was sort of silly to assume that those people, not just in the Mountain West, but across the country, doing those amazing things, would come to a big DARPA conference if they didn't already know about DARPA. It's certainly not a big, massive conference sort of at one location at one time in the year. So we decided instead we wanted to try to come to you. If the idea of DARPA appeals, and I hope that at the end of this conference it will appeal to at least some more of you than before, we hope to encourage you to take a leap with us. Help us think the thoughts we haven't thought yet. If this is even remotely appealing, you can get a start by taking a look at your brochure, whether it's the virtual one online or the paper one that you have here. We have tried really hard to set up the agenda on stage throughout this event to give you a taste of what it sort of feels like to be part of life at DARPA. So daily, the conversations that are happening in the halls, the arguments, and there are a lot of those, some of the really mind-altering challenges to what you think is actually possible. We're doing that through a series of portfolio briefs, which talk about current DARPA programs and what we're thinking about next. We have some great panel discussions, and they won't all agree with each other, so I think that'll be sort of fun. We have amazing keynote speakers. what I think of as palate cleansers in the form of lightning talks and short demonstrations. And one more thing, for each DARPA Forward event, we have also invited our host university to share the stage for about an hour and tell all the rest of us what they're working on that might be relevant to national security. You'll see those on the agenda listed as, I think, host university session. So as you look at the agenda, if you're like me, I'm guessing a lot of you have already decided what you might want to skip because it's not in your field or not in your interest area. So for just this next day and a half, I encourage you not to do that. In fact, focus on the things that you don't already know about, because it's often those unexpected connections on problems outside your area of expertise that lead to those technological surprises that DARPA depends upon so much. If we're successful, then by the end of tomorrow, your brain will hurt, but in a good way. So I should mention, if you've ever attended a DARPA conference before, you know that we like to announce big new DARPA initiatives at events like these. No different for this one. We will share some news tomorrow about a new effort at the end of the day. And if your brain hasn't already exploded by then, we'll be sure to give you something to think about on your way home.